follow Paul Hawken back at Hambrecht & Quist, where Amy says that's where I started my venture capital career. Bill Hambrecht, who's a pioneer in our industry, was an investor in Smith & Hawken, and have just followed your leadership and career and been inspired by it for decades. So thanks for being with us. I do want to have some good news. Next week, I'm going to Salinas for a Fortune magazine conference on agriculture, and they have got food waste, regenerative agriculture, organic farming. They've got all of this on the agenda. This is not a Sierra Club gathering. This is Fortune magazine. So, and I'm on a panel. I barely know anything about food waste yet, but the fact that people are gathering and people that are investors and have capital to deploy on these subjects, I think is a great positive sign that the thought and the research that you and others are doing across the world is really beginning to permeate into our financial investing and our markets, which is, of course, where we scale and really move the needle in a big way. So today I'm going to talk about where I see the next phase of clean tech investing going and what some of the key policy engagements will be as a result of that as a result of these investments over the next several years. Before I jump into that, I just want to take a moment to tell people what DBL is and what impact investing is. I know many of you are active impact investors, so I don't have to spend too much time on this, but just to provide a backdrop. So this chart, the top is the last 12 years of the field of impact investing, and the bottom half is the 12 years of DBL. We started as part of JP Morgan back in the sort of 2004 timeframe, and whoops, how did that happen? Yeah, sorry. So basically, when we started, there was no such thing as impact investing. We started as a community place-based investment vehicle in a big international bank, JP Morgan, and that was what the field only was. It was banks and foundations making program-related investments and really addressing income inequality, place-based, low-income markets and such. And so 12 years later, we have Bain Capital, we have BlackRock, we have Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, all of the big financial names are in this field and putting lots more capital to work. You've had the White House get involved, help to foster more education. The universities are writing about and teaching about the subject because there's a voracious appetite on the part of millennials for impact investing. And basically, impact investing has come to mean it's a big tent. It incorporates a lot of asset classes, but it basically means that you can invest for financial return while driving positive social, environmental, and economic change. And there are all kinds of flavors of that, but basically there is no sacrifice is really what impact investing means to us, that you can drive climate change solutions and scale and move the needle and hire lots of people at the same time that you make very compelling investment opportunities available to a broad array of investors. So that's kind of where we are today, and our firm has been very fortunate to help shape the field and also benefit from the increased attention. Where our first fund was in 2004 was 75 million. Our last fund, we're only venture capital, that's our asset class. Our last fund that we closed last summer was 400 million, making us the largest impact fund in the US. So that's just a little bit of our background. So, we never thought that impact investing would be so big and so bold. One of our chief verticals within impact investing is clean tech investing, which is what we're all going to talk about today. That has been, a bit of a roller coaster, and in the solar industry they call it the solar coaster. But it's basically, and we'll talk about this in a minute, We're going against some centuries-old incumbents and monopolies in some part of that, and that gets very dicey when you try to disrupt those kinds of industries. So this, I just want to debunk a few myths here. Everyone is talking about how clean tech investing is stagnant and shrinking. This just shows you that, while we've had some fits and starts, especially in that period where renewables were kind of politicized in the 2011 timeframe, we saw a drop. But it's a healthy trend globally and increasing. Since we've been at this now for 12 years, and these are two of our companies that started basically from nothing, Tesla and SolarCity, the Clean Energy Index and NASDAQ, and then we've got some of our other companies at the bottom. But you can see there was, in the early phase, there was kind of overinflation, too many VCs chasing too few deals. A lot of VCs that had gotten burned in the dot-com demise in the 2000 era kind of came into clean tech, not really understanding it. And so we call them the tourists, and they have left the market largely and gone back into tech. And so you have a more committed base now. But the reaction to some of the investments that were made in that mid-2000 period, 2007-8, was to kind of overstate some of the risks. And so you had over-contraction. Now what we see is, while the public markets are somewhat volatile, and these are two of the highest beta stocks that you have out there, you can see the index is a little more steady. But basically, you're getting back to the basics of venture investing: innovation, disruption, big markets, using technology and market innovation to really reshape our energy economy for 21st century needs. So we really do think that the valuations have come down. There are examples of companies that have been successful. People have made some money. So we're pretty optimistic in terms of how we're rebuilding the sector. But we're not really doing enough is the problem. In terms of the analyses, you can see large amounts spent in investing in clean energy, but a lot of experts say that we need a trillion. And last year we spent some 329 billion. People say that over the next 25 years, we should spend an additional 500 billion to really get at reshaping the economy to reflect a low carbon profile. And so how we need more people at this party. Who's going to fill that gap? Obviously our fund we think is big, but it's really not big in the scheme of things. We need the big pension funds, the high net worth foundation, family offices and foundations. We need corporations coming in. We need alliances. We need a whole new approach to kind of jumping into this field. And the good news is that is happening. And you're going to hear from Rob Bernard at Microsoft. Corporations are putting huge amounts of assets for business sense, not just for climate change. You saw that Bill Gates and other wealthy technologists are gathering assets to invest in this field, both long-term and shorter-term bets. You're seeing pension funds, you're seeing nations come together. That came out of Paris as well, mission innovation. So we are able to see increased amounts of funding come in. It's still a little bit difficult to get people to actually jump in and invest, and that's really what we try to do, is to give people a sense of where the opportunities are. And the good news is that the market opportunities have increased in a huge way, and the fact that Paul was talking about regenerative agriculture and food waste, those weren't on the map, when we started, and weren't really when this field was young. And at H&Q we had an environmental fund way back in 1990, which was a really difficult time to do environmental investing, but we kind of made our way through that. But you could really only do solar, wind, recycling, and biofuels. I mean, that was all there was for a long time. And so it really didn't meet the needs of investors, it wasn't highly diversified, and there was no track record. So fast forward to today, you've got some brands, you've got electric vehicles, you've got distributed solar, but look at all of the opportunities. I'm going to delve into some of our favorites here. Everything from agriculture to functional materials to off-grid populations, space tools that bring us that visualization of carbon moving across the world. You're going to be able to get carbon real-time information on your phone pretty soon. It's going to get that cheap due to next-gen space tools. So anyway, the good news is there's a huge amount of opportunity here, and you're able to create a diversified portfolio, which is super important from a financial risk point of view. You don't want to keep investing in only the same thing. And so in our portfolio, we've gone from solar and electric vehicles. We're adding food and agriculture. I mean, we've done food now for over a decade. Space, we're looking at consumer, storage. These are the kinds of innovations that we're going to be using to create that inflection point that we all need to pay attention to. So let's get back to energy just for a moment. We're really seeing the beginning of the end of the kind of fossil fuel-based energy economy. And this just kind of shows you some of the trends and projections that folks have relating to fossil fuel use versus clean energy. And the cost curves are coming down. The technology is becoming more broadly available, and both the electricity sector and the transportation sector are being transformed as a result. I had lunch last week with an executive at Pacific Gas and Electric, one of the largest investor-owned utilities in the country, headquartered in San Francisco. And even the venerable Diablo Canyon, which when I was in college, people were demonstrating against putting it up, it's finally going to be closed. And that's almost 8% of the generation in the state of California. And the executive just said, we penciled it every single way. We spent months doing models, and every single model we created, we just could not justify keeping that reactor open based on cost. When you quantify some of the risks associated with that old nuclear plant near a earthquake fault and all of the costs associated with keeping it in operation. So that's a big change when your very big leading investor-owned utilities themselves are saying we need a more distributed, clean profile. Now, admittedly, PG&E is probably ahead of some other utilities across the country, but there's a momentum that builds when you see these kinds of shifts being made. Another important facet of the renewable revolution that helps its momentum is this, the job aspect. There's nothing more politically important in terms of gaining favor with the public and with your elected politicians than job creation. I mean, we see that at the local level, we see it across the nation. And so the fact that solar has created in just a few years over 200,000 jobs, that it has 3 times as many employees as the coal industry does, that it's growing 12 times faster than the overall workforce, and that it has a huge multiplier effect. It's also more diverse than traditional energy industries, and it's more diverse than the tech industry that it complements. So it's in the state of California, which has a pretty diversified economy, unlike Idaho, and but something that we wrestle with still is that the tech economy doesn't offer as many jobs to people of color, people that haven't had the educational opportunity to get a job in coding or whatever. So the renewables industry is a huge complement to that part of our economy because it does hire, I think at Solar City, we've got 28% Latino employees, which would be very hard for a tech company to accomplish. And so it's really an industry that is able to absorb a wider array of Americans into its employee statistics. And so that adds a huge amount of political power and relevance to our industry that we didn't have even back in 2008 when we were trying to extend the investment tax credit for the first time. So with all of these trends, you may be saying, wow, it's all going well. What's not to like, or what could go wrong? Unfortunately, the problem is that a lot can go wrong, and it's because we do all this work. We have the amazing research that's done in universities and at places that Paul Hawken just described, and yet we are disrupting a century-old industry that has been a monopoly. And so while we in our lives have lived through all kinds of disruption with phones and computers and music, Pandora being one of our investments, the same thing doesn't happen in electricity because we're not used to innovation. I mean, a lot of us the slide that Amy showed that said that 35% of electricity comes from coal in Idaho, a lot of people don't even know that. A lot of people don't even know where the meter is on their house. I mean, there's just not the kind of attention to this because we've just had a monopoly take care of this and not innovate for 100 years. So it's very different than what we've experienced in these other sectors where we've actually lived through these changes and we've seen what it's like to have a phone that plays music and takes pictures as opposed to a landline with a dial that we all grew up with. So this lack of energy literacy has created a bit of a David and Goliath aspect to the sector, where the usual coalitions that come together around social causes, they've taken longer to coalesce. The financial coffers between the incumbents and the new entrants are vastly different. And we run into even issues relating to union versus non-union employees. We run into even infighting between big solar and rooftop solar. I mean, I could go on and on. So these are the growing pains of disrupting something that's been asleep for 100 years. On the plus side, we do see really interesting alliances, the Green Tea Party that we've seen in the South that brings together the environmentalists with the Tea Party activists that want more choice in their energy profile. That's a really good sign of the depth of the industry. And we are seeing more choice come into play in terms of the way we're organizing for change. And choice is obviously one of the most dominant investment themes of our era in other sectors, and now it's coming happily to this one. The issue is that unlike the telecom industry where you had the breakup of a monopoly assisted by a law change in Washington, the Telecom Act of, when was it, 1996. What happens a lot in energy in our country is that it's a state-by-state decision. The PUCs, the commissions decide a lot of this. There is a role for the federal government, obviously, but this makes for more money having to be spent by these young companies on government affairs, on policy. I've never seen, I mean, I've been a venture investor for over 20 years. I've never seen an industry that hires so many policy experts. And it's an expense for a young company that's very hard to manage. It also introduces much more volatility. You know, just the example that Mayor Jonas gave of the state coming in to try to preempt what Sun Valley had done about plastics. I mean, that kind of thing happens all over in this industry. I mean, net metering or auto dealership rules state by state. So it adds a little bit of volatility and uncertainty to the sector, which is one of the reasons that we really have to rethink the way that we engage in those kinds of dialogues, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So just to underscore how states differ and play such a critical role, this is one of my favorite slides, and this is solar per capita last year. So I like this per capita slide because it evens out the big state versus small state and syndrome, and you'll see that Idaho has some room to grow. But it's not at the bottom. I mean, there are a lot of bigger states below you. So, I mean, anyway. But just look at the top 4 states in terms of solar per capita. And this is where most solar is in the country: Nevada, Hawaii, Arizona, and California. Everything else is just, it reduces very, very quickly. And where in the past 18 months, where were most of the net metering battles fought? Well, no surprise, it's not a coincidence, those 4 states. Hawaii has basically gotten rid of net metering, has put into place a solar and storage regulatory regime, which will be very helpful and that will encourage innovation. But Nevada is still, has canceled it, has not allowed for grandfathering. Arizona is being sued for antitrust in terms of imposing fees. California had a huge review of net metering and actually extended it for many years, so that was a big win for the industry. But it's no coincidence that where you get a lot of solar, you get much more policy friction. And so what is happening is that there's going to have to be more money spent, but more sophisticated kinds of efforts, things like lawsuits, things like ballot initiatives. I mean, whoever thought that something as boring as net metering would be the subject of a ballot initiative in Nevada, but that's exactly what's happening. And it's a little, I think it's important that we understand that, because as much as we love some of the policy innovations that we see around us, some of these, say New York, where we're really learning how to restructure the electricity sector through some of the work they're doing. But Audrey Zibelman, I saw a quote from her. She's the head of the Public Service Commission there that's doing a lot of this brilliant rewriting of regulations. But she said, a lot of states are fighting, and we're not fighting. We're just, we're developing this new policy. But the reason there's no one fighting in New York is because, look, they're 17th in terms of, there's no real solar in New York yet. It's an embryonic market. And so you don't get the kind of testing of models and political coalitions until you actually make progress. So that's the good news. When you look at the 4 largest states by population, only one of them is in the top 4 solar states. That's California. Texas is the 2nd largest state. That's one that's up and coming. There's a lot more solar going to be put up there over the next 10 years. Florida, which is now the 3rd largest state, is basically a wasteland because of laws prohibiting all kinds of solar innovation. But that will change over the next 10 years. And then the 4th largest state, New York, is going to be changing and aided by very, very positive regulatory approaches. But it's all going to be in the future. And so that's good news. We've got, except for California, some of our largest states where many people in this country live are really undeveloped solar-wise. So there's a lot of more potential ahead. And the important thing about solar and EVs is that they're very synergistic. I always say that EVs are the Trojan horse for energy literacy, because when you get an electric vehicle, you begin to wonder, I mean, you're very proud, of course, that you're switched from gasoline, but then you say, well, where does my energy come from? And so you begin to kind of think about the energy grid in your region. And a lot of times people install solar as a result, because they say, oh, well, I don't want my car to be powered by a coal plant. I want it to run on clean energy. So there's a lot of important synergies that start to happen with solar in terms of other aspects of carbon reduction. One policy area, I'm not going to go into a huge kind of depth with it, but it's important to understand that the role of data in this next battle that we have going to expand choice and clean energy. And one of the things that we've learned is that the more you put arguments in terms that people can understand, like health, jobs, economic development, and not just climate change, the more broadly you're able to build your coalitions. And so looking at data access enables us to join with the workers and the leaders and companies like Microsoft and Google and Amazon and Facebook and such. And so instead of being off on our own as a clean energy industry, looking at the way we can use data to create stronger, more cost-effective energy systems, electricity systems, transportation systems, agricultural systems is going to be very important. And it's just think about if you ordered an Uber and your driver had to kind of look up where you were, didn't have that data instantaneously available, or you didn't have the information of when the driver was going to arrive or how long it would take you. I mean, the whole utility and the attraction of that service would be much, much lower. Well, that's where we are in electricity data right now. We don't share information about where's the best place to put a solar farm, where's the grid the weakest, where's demand the highest, where are the peaks very frequent and necessitating access to peak loads. These kinds of questions are very hard to answer. And oftentimes when you go into a state wanting to put in, if you're a company wanting to, like a casino in Las Vegas, which has plenty of sun, you can't get from your utility where the electricity flows are, what the cost is, and there's often a reaction from utilities that says, oh, well, you can't change that, or we can't give you this information because this is proprietary, and you'll decrease the reliability of the grid, or you'll raise electricity prices. Those kinds of objections are often raised, and there's no data to prove it one way or another. And so this is an area that DBL and working with some of our portfolio companies and other data companies, we want to help solve that, because utilities have a great role to play in our energy future, but it's not really their skill set. I think if you were asked the question, who has more data expertise, Microsoft or what's your utility here? Yeah, Idaho Power. I mean, I think that we. So we should just go with that. That should be a positive. We should allow the experts and those that really have an incentive to unpack all of this to our advantage and kind of make that switch from that centralized, very top-down driven approach of the past. So I'm just going to, in the end, the last part of this, I just want to talk about some of the areas we love. We heard about graphene batteries. Batteries storage, really a game changer. I'm not going to go into all the technologies. I will say that ion lithium, of course, is way out in front now, but is not the only solution, whether it's graphene or flow batteries. The sort of short pulsing nature of ion lithium batteries, why they work so well in a car, for example, is not always ideal for long discharge charge settings for reshaping a load curve in a building, for example. You will need different kinds of batteries. So while there will be a huge market for ion lithium, and you see these growth curves as being very, very strong, there will be other chemistries, other approaches, and this is going to be a very, very fertile ground for innovation and solve a lot of the problems that we have through the intermittency of some of our renewable resources. You're also going to see people start to package these new batteries in different ways, along with software that will enable you to really become a mini power plant in your own office park, so that you can pull your electricity from the grid when it's cheapest, or from your rooftop, or from a battery, do demand response automatically, so that you can infuse more energy efficiency into that building, and do this on a real-time basis. This is not some space age, far off dream. This is happening now. One of our companies called Advanced Microgrid Solutions is going to announce tomorrow one of the largest financings of a distributed storage approach to date, and will allow you to really use electricity and generate electricity at a local basis without this tension of not having the grid at all. I mean, I think that what really we see going forward is that the grid will be used as an energy resource much as solar and batteries will be, but it will be a combined approach that will be much more cost effective and resilient. So energy storage makes a lot of problems that we see in today's grid, turns them into solutions. And the good news is that the costs of those technologies are coming down. It's been very difficult. I think anyone that's invested in a battery company has had those frustrations because the science and the technology are just now being solved. So another area that we like, what? Okay, I've got just two more, is agriculture, and Paul talked a lot about this. It's a huge, we've got a lot of mouths to feed. We've got, it's a huge emitter of carbon, 24% of global emissions. Again, data can be used to make better choices for farmers, not only in terms of carbon emissions, but enabling farmers to make a living that allows them to stay on their land and allow their kids to inherit that way of life. Farming has been at risk in this country in terms of its ability to answer needs for food production and a way of life for the people that do it. And it's because the supply chain is broken. And farmers that have not had access to their own data in terms of which seeds work well, and they usually overwater, over-fertilize, use too many pesticides because that's the incentive of the systems to sell them a lot of that. So getting hold of their own data, being able to use that to make better decisions will drive less carbon in the agricultural process as it increases the margins of farmers. And we have a company called Farmers Business Network that is doing that, starting in the Midwest in commodity crops. And then the final opportunity, which I know Rob is going to talk about as well, so I'm not going to go into huge detail, but is it's one of the biggest impact opportunities that I certainly have seen in my lifetime, and that is the billion people out there that don't even have access to electricity. Those billion people, there's 15% of the world that doesn't have access. Half of that is in sub-Saharan Africa. This is a region of the world that has only about 6% of the population is middle class. So in the 21st century, that's just not okay. I mean, we need to fix that, and we need to address this as a important business opportunity, not just as an NGO government-funded opportunity, because those are wonderful, but they can't scale, and obviously this is a market that needs to scale. So the good news is that we're taking all the lessons that we've learned from investing in companies like Tesla and SolarCity and applying them to this market. Cheap solar panels and batteries and super efficient appliances that you pay for with your mobile phones, which is what's done very actively in that region, allow you to replace kerosene and or worse solutions for lighting with a modern distributed approach. And this is happening now. Our company we've invested in called Off Grid Electric in Tanzania. There's another great company, M-Kopa, in Kenya. This is going to be not only transforming the electricity profile in the region, but it's really going to bring Africa into the middle class and develop an entrepreneurial profile, job creation, and improve the quality of life for everyone on that continent and in regions that have been left behind in the last century. So the need is great. The opportunity is staring us in the face. The whole world is watching us, and we have that obligation to future generations. I think as we jump into this next phase, we've got to think bigger than we ever have before, and we really need to develop a thick skin. I've learned that over the past 10 years, that there's a lot of cynics out there, and there's a lot of incumbents that will go after what you're trying to do. But nothing really is more empowering than being an agent of change. And I can think of no greater legacy for us to leave to our children and our grandchildren than having helped to move our innovation economy and our capital markets from a 20th century paradigm in energy to one that fits the needs of the 21st century. And in gatherings like this one in Paris, where Amy and I were together, in Sun Valley and beyond, I think we really are gaining the strength to make things happen. And it's really a privilege to do this work. It's an honor to learn from people like you in this room and all over the world about how we can work together to create this clean energy future. And so I want to thank you all for the work that you do and your role in this transformation, because I really do believe that together we can and will do this. Thank you very much.